All right, welcome back to the Autistic Tidbits and Tangents podcast. I'm one of your hosts, Kara Dymond. I am an autistic teacher, university lecturer, author, researcher from Toronto, Canada. Well, Georgetown, Canada now.
Ooh, fancy pants.
Yes.
Hello, everybody. My name is Bruce Petherick. I am, what's my job today? I'll be an autistic musician, and my day job is autistic advocate for Autism Canada. I am on beautiful, wonderful metropolitan Vancouver lands at the moment, in Canada, of course.
We're really excited to have a guest with us today, Pugal Sivasankar, was born in Tamil Nadu, India, is researching space situational awareness in Florida, which sounds so cool. After his undergrad in India, he moved to the Netherlands for his master's degree, where he received his ASD diagnosis. Besides explaining a lot of aspects of his life, the diagnosis helped him to get help to change for the better. During his master's, he traveled to Belgium, China, and Sweden for various trainings. Upon completing his master's, he moved to the US to pursue research. Besides research, Pugal practices spirituality and helps people in need, gardening with his old neighbor, food donations, free math tutoring, etc. His hobbies include swimming, hiking, yoga, martial arts, and volleyball. His social media presence is minimal, and he can be reached through LinkedIn. So welcome to our podcast.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. And congratulations that you have almost got my name the second attempt.
I should have practiced more.
That's okay. The point is, my name, the first name is actually my name. That's an ancient name. So people do not really have those names unless they are really fond of the language or some of the ancient poets in that language. And so I was named after an ancient poet.
Amazing.
Yeah.
What's ancient mean in this case?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So let's see, maybe 8-9 centuries before I was born.
Okay.
That is considered as ancient. And the name has a meaning.
Mm-hmm.
The first name translates to embodiment of fame.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah.
And can you say it once properly so that people get to hear it the right way?
Okay, so my first name is pronounced as Pugal. And the shortened version that I gave you, Pugal, means fame.
Oh, Pugal. Oh, that's a nice way of shortening it.
In my native language.
Yes.
Okay.
So today we're going to be talking about a whole bunch of topics. We're going to talk about being a multilingual autistic person, all of your experiences, understanding idioms and phrases, especially doing research in different countries, but especially primarily in the US, some of the influences on you in discovering your autism, and lots of other things. So let's get started.
Okay.
Welcome to Autistic Tidbits and Tangents.
Candid conversations between autistic off-hour professionals.
With lots of tangents in different accents.
Cool. Trigger warnings for this episode include mentions of the atomic bomb, different historical figures, all in an otherwise really fascinating discussion of multiculturalism, spiritualism, science, and being autistic.
There's so many things to talk about, but one thing in your biography certainly stands out to me. And can you tell us a little bit about your research?
Okay, I can paraphrase what I'm doing for the benefit of the larger audience, but there are limitations to the extent that I can share my research. So space situational awareness is a field where if you have a system, the system is trying to be aware of its surroundings and what objects are moving close to, coming towards it or moving away from it. So in this case, the system is the Earth, and then the objects that are moving around the Earth or the satellites that we send into space. The asteroids are not that close to the Earth than the satellites. The point is, I would like to quote John Glenn here, the old American astronaut. He said in the 1960s, when I went to space, there was actually space. But now that's not the scenario, because we have been launching lots and lots of satellites. And it was okay in the 60s and the 70s when it was totally empty. But now it's getting crowded. It's getting crowded. Mm-hmm. And when the space age started, we did not think about, or mostly, we did not think about the sustainability of this operation, right? But now we are coming to a point that, okay, it's getting very crowded. And one crucial detail to understand is a satellite in low Earth orbit, which means roughly starting at 500 kilometer altitude, all the way up to 2,000 kilometers altitude from the surface of the Earth, is traveling at a speed of 7 kilometers a second. It's traveling at a speed of 7 kilometers a second, which means a small object of this size hitting you at 7 kilometers per second is going to create a lot of damage, right?
Yes, of course.
And it's not just 7 kilometers per second. The other object that is approaching it is also traveling at 7 kilometers per second, roughly. So the relative velocity or the speed is 14 kilometers per second. At that speed, even if you see something that's coming close to you, it's already too late to move.
Yes.
It's like when you're driving, you see and you drive, because the reaction time and the time taken to drive the vehicle off collision course is manageable. But that's not the case in space. You have to know a lot more in advance. It's not like, you see and then you just move away like that.
Yeah. Oh my, my heart is racing. I'm terrified of outer space. So I am in awe of you right now.
So and then the maneuverability in space is also limited, meaning, yes, it can move, but not as fast as, not like zip zap, like Star Trek kind of, that's in science fiction. Like the current maneuvering capabilities are limited by what kind of fuel we use and how much time do we have. So a lot of planning and tracking and estimation are to be done, right? So, and adding to the complexity is the small size of the particle. Like, you can see a car coming towards you when you're driving, but not a small bee.
Yes.
But again, the small bee can do enough damage if it's traveling at 7 kilometers per second and you're also traveling at 7 kilometers per second. So a big part of my research involves quantifying the error in the position of these different objects that are out there in space. So that's, I think, a very general description that I can give about space.
And a very accessible one. I was able to follow, and I'm not a mathematician. I'm not my wheelhouse.
But what got me is they think Kara introduced me as a space researcher, which excites me because, unlike Kara, I am exactly the right age to just fall in love with space. But when I saw the space situational awareness, I thought, oh, hang on, are you doing research in autistic perception? Because we also have the space. We have a problem with space situational awareness, and it's some work that Peter Vermeulen's approaching in his latest book about the nervous system reaction time and how, in fact, we have to be predicting, everybody humans have to predict quicker than the nerves can actually respond. And when I saw the title, I went, oh, maybe I've made the wrong assumption. But no, you're doing the much more exciting out in space.
Well, it applies to both contexts. If you think about it, it is because of our limitations in the human space situational awareness. We have created cities and civilizations around us because they give us a predictable behavior. Like if there is a red light, that means everybody is supposed to stop, and 99% of the people stop.
And then we struggle with the people who don't, because they don't follow the rules.
Yeah, but think about if none of these things were absent, like in a forest, no rules, nothing.
Yeah.
They're only governed by the physical laws, and you have more sophisticated people. Now you have no idea who's going to do what and when, and that's where it becomes harder.
That's like all of my favorite TV shows. It's always like post-apocalyptic survival, no rules.
It's interesting when you talk about the forest, because in fact, forests have also evolved and developed to take into account, by and large, that unpredictability, that error analysis as well. Just nature has evolved to minimize the chaotic system that could evolve by like a pure random interaction.
Correct. Correct. Well, it works with the animals in the forest because their thinking abilities are not so sophisticated like us. For example, a lion hunts a deer and eats as long as it is hungry and leaves it there, whatever is left. Doesn't take the rest, put it in the fridge.
Yes.
For later use. So the animals stop there, which is what enables nature to keep certain things in balance. And in our case, we do something more, and that's where the sustainability, takes a hit. In my understanding, at least.
And you were also looking at, like, I'm trying not to disparage a gentleman in this conversation, but there is a well-known company that has just launched tens of thousands of microsatellites. Mm-hmm. And I know it's causing sky visibility problems. Mm-hmm. It's causing some problems with commercial aircraft, and it's just like you're looking at the edge of, we have a problem. We could have a big problem very quickly unless we start doing some mediation. Yeah?
That is true. There are departments out there called space laws and other, the International Telecommunications Union, that allocate sectors in the geostationary Earth orbit for communication purposes. So, it's a balance between the capability and then the regulation, right? Mm. So, meaning, what I mean by that is, when you don't have the capability, then there's no need to regulate that. Mm. Once the capability comes into the picture, then care has to be taken so that there is sustainable development. And sometimes in the process of making progress, humanity in the past may not have understood, okay, it's giving a lot of benefits now, but what's going to happen 100 years down the line or 200 years? Like, for example, the Industrial Revolution. Mm. Mm-hmm. When it happened, there was a lot of comfort in human lives. There was a sewing machine, printing machine, steam engine, etc., etc., etc. And society progressed quite a lot. There was artificial heating in Western countries or the Northern European countries, which was not there during the Dark Ages. Mm-hmm. There was no air conditioning, which means you suffered the heat and the cold, right? Oh, but down the line, we realized, okay, it's now contributing to a lot of pollution. It's upsetting the. So those are very subtle effects that you don't see it at the moment. But when it goes down, when it propagates down, then you see, okay, we never thought this could happen, right? And that's difficult to see in the beginning, with time, I think there will be more thoughtful decisions and to make this effort more sustainable.
2 points on that. And Kara, I'm sorry, I'm feeling
okay.
I'm dominating, but we're in some of my wheelhouses here. The Industrial Revolution, of course, not only caused great technological change, which I think historically we can still say was a positive thing, maybe not as positive as often, but the social change was even more enormous. Yes. And in fact, our whole society has shifted to reflect and encompass those changes, whether we wanted to or not. And now we're in there and going, well, was that a good thing? And I think that's still something that's up for discussion. So
that is true.
Yeah. The other thing is, I'm thinking of Dr. Robert Oppenheimer and the development of the atomic bomb. Like, I think it's very well known. There's a lot of work published on how much he was looking at both sides. At this is what the short term is going to be. He was scared of the long term, but
yes.
Yeah,
and he was right. And he was right. Robert Oppenheimer was a very thoughtful man, and not many people, including the scientists that worked with him, thought about the multidimensional aspects of what they were doing. And most of the researchers that are that do good amount of research are like very focused, because that's what they want to accomplish, and that's the job, and that's their passion. However, Robert Oppenheimer was also thinking on several dimensions of what he was doing, and I admire that man for not only his scientific prowess but also his humanitarian side of things.
I totally agree. And listeners, I love the film. I really would recommend watching the film. But if you want the real story, read the book on which the film was based. There's a lot of what Pugal has just talked about, a lot more about Robert Oppenheimer's philosophical background, his interest in poetry, and the fact that, exactly as you've just said, there were scientists who they wanted to do what they were doing, and very often, or quite often, could not quite see the bigger picture because it was exciting. Their area was exciting. And look, we all fall into that. So having something like him leading that was giving a little bit more of a philosophical overview. And we can still argue whether it was the best idea or not, but it was a very thought through process, which I think a lot of things that happened in the Second World War especially probably were not.
Yeah, so Robert Oppenheimer is known to have quoted from Bhagavad Gita. I have read Bhagavad Gita, and I've listened to a lot of discourses on Bhagavad Gita, and part of his humanitarian aspect and philosophical outlook came from his exposure to different philosophies when he was a student. And in that film, they show him reading or reciting something in Sanskrit, which is the language in which Bhagavad Gita is written. And when you expose yourself to those different aspects of human consciousness, that's when you have a broad outlook, an outlook beyond the current scenario.
Yes.
Yeah.
Beyond oneself.
I have to say, and this is a personal opinion, but again, I would recommend everybody to be considering this. I do a lot of reading in traditional Buddhist texts, and very specifically Zen. But when you look at when you look at some of the Buddhist sayings from the original Sanskrit, they're very autistic, and they've been that in a really good way. There's very much a removal of a whole bunch of it's questioning the reality, questioning what's going on, because he was questioning, why is this happening? Have you not seen? It's something that we do, I think, very well, is that we walk into a situation and go, haven't you realized this? Because you've been thinking about this for so long. Don't you also realize this? Anyway, pet thing.
I have also attended Buddhism lessons here. So I think in the presentation that I sent to Dr. Kara Dymond, there is a picture of me with a mask inside a Buddhist temple. I thank my roommate for taking me there. She has. I was drawn to Buddhism from a very young age, and my roommate, she made it happen by taking me there. So that's also a wonderful journey about Buddhism. I mean, you can ask me more questions on it. I do not know if you have a specific plan for this episode, or
we never have a specific plan.
Okay.
You should know this already.
So I'll just flow with your flow and then insert some points that I have written down regarding the questions that I sent you about what we're going to talk about.
That was like full of delightful tangents from those questions.
Actually, I actually had a line with that one.
Okay.
I was looking at the space, and then also talking about you when you sort of said, you practice spirituality. Yeah. That's coded language to me, to exactly as you explained, somebody who is looking at a whole bunch of different things.
Yeah, yeah.
And then of course Oppenheimer comes through with that. Let's go on to let's have a direction. You say one of the books that really meant something to you a lot was Olga Bogdashina's book. Mm-hmm. But I'm not sure which one, because she's written 7 or 8. Yeah.
So the book about communication is, for me, hard to read because she's originally a professor of linguistics. She was originally a professor of linguistics. So she uses a lot more terminologies on what it means, like something that we implicitly understand. He is going to the church or he's going to play volleyball, and she breaks that down. So I started reading that book, but I soon felt like, okay, I cannot go much with this. But she explains a lot more things later, but I couldn't go through the initial stages. By the way,
can you say which is the book?
I will come to that in a few sentences. Okay. But one request is, if you can get her to be in your show, that would be really helpful sometime.
Okay. Well, we can reach out. I keep a list of like who might we reach out to. So
yeah. So
thank you for the suggestion.
And when I read her book, I really wanted to find her videos in YouTube, and I have so far found only 2 or 3. Only 2 or 3. So, and I think it's probably because she is too involved with research and other things. She may not have the time to do it, but hearing her talk about her own book was an experience for me. So let me just see. I made some notes before we began.
I love it.
Okay. So autism and sensory perception issues.
Okay.
That one. Autism and the edges of perception. And then there's also one other book that I'm reading, that I started reading, and that's about autism and spirituality.
Cool.
So I have read 2 of her books front to back.
Yeah.
And then the third one, I read only a few. But autism and sensory perception issues and autism and the edges of perception. These 2 books, to say the least, revolutionized how I approached or how I am approaching my autism.
So how did that change for you? Actually, maybe we can talk a bit about your journey in coming to understand this about yourself, and then how also it changed.
Yeah. So growing up, And in a very small town in Tamil Nadu. Both my parents were working for the government at that time, and I'm an only child. So, and I had my grandmother and uncle to look after me. And then my uncle also got a job. So the time that I was with others in the sense peers, was very limited.
Mm-hmm.
And, I'm very grateful to my parents for providing me with good education and a very nourishing environment. Um, but most of the time, I kind of, what would you call this? Like, I was happy being
Yes.
myself.
Yes.
And I love to play sports. I was, as I mentioned in my bio, I played volleyball. I still do. I also played cricket. In fact, almost every kid who grew up in India
Plays
knows
cricket.
cricket by default.
Yeah.
Do we need to explain to Kara what cricket is?
I know what cricket is.
Okay. Pugal, maybe you don't realize you pick up the accent. I'm originally from Australia, so
Yeah. You mentioned a number of times, and Australia was quite the number one team for a number of years. And personally, I have admired Australians, but we had one batsman, master batsman, who was who challenged the Australian bowlers a lot. Sachin, I don't know.
Sachin Tendulkar.
Sachin Tendulkar. He has almost 10 centuries against Australia. That's the maximum against any cricket playing country.
And you may not know this, and Kara, you definitely won't, but like in the Australian press, at that time, there were often articles about like what person would people want to come play for Australia. It was Brian Lara and Sachin Tendulkar.
Yeah.
Everybody else, like, no, Australians were kind of better, but everyone went Sachin Tendulkar, definitely.
Yeah. And they would say when he comes to play, there will be a lot more people coming to watch. And of course, there were quite a number of Indians living in Australia, but it was also the Australian people. It's like, it's beyond the identity of a country, and to enjoy the strokes and the sportsmanship. Anyway, so when I played games, I realized that I had coordination difficulties, but I was also a very precise bowler, and that helped me to overshadow the other difficulties.
Interesting.
Okay. So it's like initially I was not very favored in any of the teams, but once people with autism have a tendency to follow a routine, follow a structure. So I carved a niche for myself in bowling, and that helped me to get a spot in a team. So it's like, he may not be good at batting, he may not be good at fielding, but man, when he bowls, there will be a wicket, one or two, something like that. So that was my experience with coordination difficulties, which was not very visible at that time, because I was big and moving, but not in a very specific way that the batting or fielding requires, right? So this is what I don't know again which podcast or which book I read. They call it islands of abilities. Bruce might be able to trace it, but it's like the abilities are not continuous.
Yes.
It's like somewhere there is a rich vegetation, and then suddenly there is water, and then again there is rich vegetation.
I like that better than scattered skills, but that's the same concept, just a different name.
Yes.
And actually, just out of interest of this one, which is kind of interesting. The thing with cricket, when you're bowling, you're in control. You're controlling the environment. When you're fielding and when you're batting, you don't have control of the environment. You can be predicting, and I just wonder if that's a. Anyway, thank you. That's interesting.
That's an interesting point you bring up, because bowling. Just for all the viewers out there, cricket is what I would call as a start and stop game. So the game starts when the bowler starts to run, and then releases the ball. The batsman hits the ball, and the fielders chase the ball and throw it back to the bowler. And then you reset, and then you begin again. Reset, and you begin again. And this is how it happens. And because bowler is the starting point, Bruce is right. There is a lot more control as to control and more relaxation, because there's nothing happening before that. But when
nothing you're
batsman,
responding to. You are the stimulus.
Yes,
Yeah.
exactly. You are the stimuli, and the batsman and the fielder. It's like stimuli response, and then the stimuli response, and the stimuli response, right? So that's how my coordination difficulties were masked, because I was the stimuli. And I think in one of the very first podcasts that Dr. Dymond made, she was talking about her book, Autism Lens, the Autism Lens.
Yes.
This is like she talking alone, like nobody was there. And in that, she mentioned that she had difficulty socializing as a kid when things got political. Like in the playground, when things got political. That struck me a lot, because I experienced the same. Like, as long as things were going smooth, it was a nice journey. But when two kids started quarreling, I felt some uneasiness in my heart. Like, it's like something pushing. Even though I was not responsible for the quarrel, even though I am not involved in that quarrel, but just because I'm playing with them, that political tension or whatever tension ruffled me a lot. A lot. And then when I'm involved, that's even more. Like, oh my God, did I do something wrong? Or did I say something wrong? And so on and so forth. So that's another. And here's the point. The two quarreling kids would be all right after 20 minutes.
But it stays with you. Yes, stays with you a lot longer.
For me, it stayed a lot longer. And I felt like, wait, they are okay, but I'm not okay. And why is that? So that's another.
Pugal, if I may interrupt, you asked just before we started how we were, and Kara responded, but I did not. I'm not in a good space because of exactly what you said. I was ordered to come to a meeting about a group that I'm involved with. I don't want to talk about names and things. And it was all about me. It was very political. I had a friend of support, but I didn't sleep last night. And even now, as you're saying it, all I'm doing is thinking about, what did I do wrong? Why was I involved? How could I have made that better? And I bet they all, I bet
give it a second thought. Yeah.
Well, maybe a second thought, but they probably all went on with it. But it's going to take me a couple of days to get over this. And, I'm 60, still dealing with this.
So those were a few moments that I realized I was different, very different from others. And, this started. And again, these differences have both sides to it, meaning there are certain spaces that influence me a lot more than other people. And as Bruce was talking to us about Buddhism and Zen books and whatnot, I have, growing up in India, I visited a lot of temples. My parents have taken me to a lot of temples. And there is one temple at the very southern tip of India, one place. It's called Kanyakumari, or Cape Comorin, as the British would say it. And there is a rock, and there is a, how do I put it? Let's put it as a temple built on that rock. It was built to honor Vivekananda. So he was the Indian monk who traveled to the United States in the 1890s to talk about Hinduism at Chicago. International Conference of Religions on Chicago.
Yep.
And one of the big impacts that he made was he started the speech by saying, "My dear brothers and sisters of America." which nobody did before that time. It was always ladies and gentlemen. It was always ladies and gentlemen.
Yeah.
Anyway, so my parents took me to that place, and I was about 9 or 10, wasn't true. And the energy in that space was of great influence to me. And this is again the way the other people around me responded to it, and the way I was influenced by it is totally different. It stays with me till today.
Yes,
And,
I relate to that very much. I was a really spiritual child myself, and I was raised Catholic, and
I went to Catholic school.
yeah, okay, so and I just felt this sort of profound connection to something greater, to what I conceptualized as God, as a child in so many places, and I just. My peers did not have the same sort of feeling and sense that I had all the time. And I stopped doing, I was in an extracurricular. What was it? It might have been horseback riding. And I told my parents I wanted to stop, and I just wanted to have reflection time and be able to read spiritual texts. And I was like 10 years old.
Wow. To use Bruce's terms, it's almost like a tuning fork. A tuning fork responding, like you don't need to even touch it. If there is a right frequency,
The resonances.
that is the exact resonance there. And Olga Bogdashina describes this word resonance in one of her books. And that chapter, that portion of the book was hitting me very hard. So I resonated with that place in southern Tamil Nadu. And a few other places, and it's just like I was almost in a trance, and for a while, and probably people around me, including my parents, didn't pick up on that because I was 10 years old.
And you were in a temple, like
yeah.
How was one else supposed to respond?
10 years old, but I know they and the journey continued. Like several summers. So that's when I realized, okay, I have a very different response to some spaces, some consecrated or energy spaces than most other people. So in many ways, life told me that I am different, that I am significantly different from others. And and another thing, when I was 16, during my high school, that's the first time we had to appear for a public exam, which is called as board exam, and that determines that was a big thing back then, and it still is. So students are encouraged to study hard, and I was a good student in all my classes. So naturally, I was put on the spotlight to study and to do well in my exams, but physics, the subject physics, it drew so much of me to it, that initially, during the first 3 months of that year, I had difficulty studying many subjects.
Because you wanted to do physics.
No,
monotropic
I was also studying physics. Physics was one of the subjects. There were 8 other subjects. So I would say I had difficulty assimilating information in the first 3 months.
Interesting.
And others were progressing much faster. And it appeared that I was progressing slower. But once things started clicking, it was almost an exponential growth.
Yes.
So think about a linear function and an exponential function. A linear function grows like this, and an exponential function is slow, and then it takes over at some point. So in my case, sacred space.
That's a reminder.
In my case, someone who was not able to, memorize, understand, and write a detailed answer as clearly and as quickly as I was expected at that time. A few months later, I loaded the whole book in my head.
Yes. Wow.
To the point that they would have sessions with me where they would say an equation or a word, and I could trace it back to what page
Yeah.
in that book and
Yeah.
where in that page the word comes.
Mm-hmm.
So it was almost an eidetic memory, and it was a surprise to me.
Yes.
It's like, how did I do that? So that's another aspect where I understood, okay, I'm very different.
I think a number of us have that skill. What's unusual about this is that you didn't know before. That's interesting.
I mean, I have it. I would say I have sort of like a blurry version where I can remember approximately on a page where information is and where in the book it would be. It's not perfect, like I can't call up word for word, but I don't think I've fully realized I could do that either for a while. So I don't know that that's something you necessarily have the insight about yourself, that is substantially different than maybe how other people process and retain text.
And for me, it's music. Mm-hmm. Sometimes, even like yesterday, somebody said something and I was visualizing the score and I almost said it's page 3. No, hang on, that's not really useful. I had to look it up to find the bar number. Yeah.
So music is another dimensionality to me. I was trained in Carnatic music, the Indian classical music, for a while. Mm-hmm. I cannot write scores or I cannot read, but because of that training, I have a music sense. Mm-hmm. I have a music sense and what they would call as a perfect pitch. Mm-hmm. I may not be able to sing in perfect pitch, but I know when someone or something sounds slightly different.
Yes.
So does that transfer to Western music?
Possible if I listen to it like.
But you mainly listen to Carnatic music when you realize that?
Could you please rephrase your question or repeat your question?
Okay, so funnily enough, I've also done some work with Carnatic music, but also I worked some more North Indian. And mm-hmm. one of the psychological aspects about perfect pitch is that it tends to be cultural. In other words, there are people with perfect pitch who can recall or know when something's out of tune. But if they, for instance, a European person, someone raised in Western classical music, they don't have that same perception if they listen to Indian classical music or Chinese classical music because the whole cultural system is different. And it's kind of interesting because, go on.
There is a lot of truth to your statement because I think it's also because of the way people are trained in music. Mm-hmm. Because in Carnatic music, when you try to learn Carnatic music, they give you a set of instructions before they give you the lesson. Mm. Like what frame of mind one should be in, and how to approach the teacher, how to approach the music. Mm-hmm. So there is a lot of reverence to the teacher and to the subject that you are taught.
And that happens with raga as well, isn't it? I mean, you learn what the raga is and what its meaning before you even start playing it. Yes. Or start using it. Yeah.
So there is a lot of introduction, like this is how you should approach it. The right way to, and you can go beyond it. Am I clear? Like
there was just a moment of being frozen.
Okay. Yeah, when you learn it, that's like learning grammar. And then when you become a master of it, then you bend the grammar and then you go beyond the grammar. Mm. But then there is a certain degree of respect that one has to give to learn Carnatic music. So I think when you're trained in that way, you develop that sense that the neurons are configured in a way that you develop that sense. Because I have seen, as I said that I practice spirituality, so I'm part of an international spiritual organization. And through that, I have met people from India, I have met people from the Netherlands, Germany, Belgium, Australia, whatnot. And I have seen one Dutch lady singing a Carnatic song, during a small gathering. And I was amazed, like, how is she able to sing this note at this pitch for this long? Mm-hmm. And that's because she was trained in Carnatic music for a while. So it's not the person, but it's about how you train that person. Mm. And then there is also a certain limitation, like not everybody can master everything. Some people can master only some parts of the music. So, and then we call them maestro, right? Yeah. Okay, so as I was saying, as I was growing up, I had all these experiences, moments that told me that I am different, I'm different. And I was a valedictorian in high school, so people thought that, he should have no problem moving on to college or getting whatever he wanted to study. And I got what I wanted to study, aeronautical engineering. But the transition from school to college was unusually difficult for me.
Really? I'm not surprised, but...
Me too.
The point is, people around me in my family were so confused as to why are you having such a difficulty going to the college?
Yeah.
What's the problem? You were a valedictorian and, you should be, it's like just continuing. Well, the thing was, I had to move away from my home and live in the dorms.
Yes, I did.
And I thought that I could adapt just like my friends.
Yeah.
But I couldn't.
Yeah.
Then the teaching methodology in the school and in the college was different. And more importantly, I could not clearly understand what is expected out of me in this new learning system.
Yes.
It was always very vague. So, and plus there were all other issues that resulted me in taking a 1-year break.
Okay.
So I started college and I was there for 2 months, and then I took a break for another 10 months. And during that time, there was a lot of self-reflection, bouncing from places to places, living with different family members. And, I'm very grateful that they all supported me. But it was also a time when I began to see, okay, I am different in a lot more ways than I can understand. At that time, I didn't know it was autism. At that time, people around me didn't know it was autism because...
Now, can I get you to pause just for a moment? Because I'm wondering, like, were you aware of autism? What were your thoughts about autism at all?
No, I was not aware of a word called autism.
Okay.
Until I was in the second or third year of my undergrad. So the awareness of autism, at least when I was growing up, was not that much. And probably, I think this is also the experience in Western countries, that there is a stigma around mental health, but there's no stigma around physical health.
Which is interesting.
There's a lot of stigma around mental health, and it was also there in the place where I grew up.
Yeah. So
it made things more difficult. But after that 1-year gap, I resumed and I studied, but with a very different outlook. And I was constantly searching. But I didn't, the word autism, I first studied in a newspaper article. I learned that in a newspaper article. And it said, a person with autism may not communicate in the way you want. And I thought, maybe this is talking about autism. But I didn't see that in myself at that moment because, I was not having therapy sessions or anything at that time.
It's also hard for us to come across something like that saying, oh, an autistic person has problem social communication. You don't instantly think, is that me? I mean, you just think, I'm living my life and that's what is normal. This is what my life is like.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. So there was no external reference, or there was no detailed external reference to explain to me how my communication was different from the quote unquote normal or the neurotypical population in technical
That's such a good
terms.
point.
Anyway, then I moved to the Netherlands for my master's. That was a big shift, big cultural shift, big academic shift again. And I was doing well for a while, and then the pace of the studies was so different from what I was used to in India that I couldn't adapt. And they said, okay, most of the international students who come here have this difficulty. They come from different backgrounds, different climatic conditions. So probably that's what you are going through as well.
Wow.
And again, there were like many factors that couldn't let me clearly see, okay, this is the point. Okay, it's like it was always merged into the background of some other problem, some other issue. And then it took a lot longer for me to finish a few things, especially the group projects were difficult for me. And the part that was difficult for me was if there is a leader in the group who designates, okay, you do this task, you do this task, you do this task, then it was easy for me to take the task and then do it. But what happened was we were given a task, and then it was expected of us to figure out among ourselves who is going to do what. So that's again the peer interaction. The peer interaction, and then the executive functioning difficulties, like all those things started surfacing there, and the impact of that was quite a lot on my studies. It was not the case when I did my undergrad. The impact or the cost of that was not that revealed in the results. But in the Netherlands, it was a lot more. So I was taking more hits, and that's when I decided to see a therapist. So I had to go from one to another, like almost 3 therapists. Initially, they prescribed me cognitive behavior therapy, and it was a 13-week program, and it worked for a while. And this is where I would like to quote Dr. Tony Attwood, who said, cognitive behavior therapy means you have to cognize first. But if you are not cognizant of what is happening to you, then the behavior and the therapy parts will not work effectively.
Exactly.
So, in cognitive behavior therapy, relapses are expected, and it happened to me. But when the therapist questioned me about the reason for the relapse, I was at a loss for words. I couldn't, especially when she asked me the question, so how do you feel about it? And I went blank.
Alexithymia.
Yes, exactly.
Alexithymia. And then she realized, she then directed me to some other therapists specializing in this kind of problems. And then I went through the process of so here is an interesting part. So before I went there, I had a friend of mine who came and stayed with me for a while in the Netherlands. And he was watching the show, the sitcom Friends, in YouTube. Well, I wasn't that into that sitcom, but the next clip was something from the Big Bang Theory.
Bruce.
So I was drawn to that title first because
naturally,
because I'm a physicist, or I was interested in physics. So what is this Big Bang? Friends was like more of a social title, but the Big Bang Theory had the nerd effect.
Yeah.
The title has a nerd effect. So it started playing, and then obviously it was Sheldon who was appearing in that clip, and it instantly clicked with me. Wait, this is exactly like me. This is exactly like me. And as I was going through CBT, I went online and read about the Big Bang Theory. Wikipedia page showed many members of the audience have suggested that the character Sheldon appears to have Asperger's syndrome, although the writers say that they didn't conceptualize that character with that. Now, I don't know what the writers did or what they didn't, but it helped me.
Mm-hmm.
So
what happened was that Jim Parsons, who played the part, actually from the start played him as autistic. He didn't realize that anybody would even consider it to be anything else. So the writers never stated it was autism, but he played it as autistic, which I think that's why it connects so much because my journey, exactly the same thing. It was looking at Sheldon going,
that's me.
So
sorry, yeah.
Yeah, so in the third therapy, when I went to the third therapist, I told her, look, I suspect I may have this because I was watching this show and it mirrors a lot of what I'm going through. Could you help me? And then she helped me quite a lot to get through the diagnosis. It was a long journey, but I'm glad it happened because it then opened the doors to the many books that I read. At that time I was a student, so I could get my hands on only a few books, mostly electronic versions, because I'm also an international student, which means I cannot carry a lot of books. And that's when it started with Dr. Tony Atwood. And then as I read, I wanted to be very thorough in my understanding of myself. So
yes.
I started reading.
How autistic of you.
Yeah. And then as I started reading, I was drawn to it. And initially I read popular books, and then I went into more of these more detailed psychological explanations with references. And then I understood, okay, this is how scientific literature is written. And that's when I came across Olga Bogdashina's book. And to come back to where we started, this question, how did her book change me? Until that point, so I hope I have given enough about my journey of autism. And until that point, until I read her book, the approach was always outside in, from the periphery to the core. Like, okay, people with autism have difficulty socializing. They have difficulty doing things in time or accomplishing, which is executive functioning deficits. Forming relationships is hard. And then weak central coherence. So these were all like very technical terms, but they all appear to be like separate parts. It's, to give you an analogy, think about a sphere, and then you're touching different parts of a sphere. Not knowing these are all different parts of the same sphere.
Yes.
And Olga Bogdashina's book changed it to inside-out approach. So the very first thing that she said was, everything starts with perception.
Yes.
If you are different at the level of perception, then everything that follows that, processing and responding, cannot be but different.
Yes.
So she's evidently the first person to look from autism from an internal perspective. And these books are 2003, 2007, something like that. Yeah, and it's kind of interesting how, to be honest, I don't think Kara and I had you ever heard of her?
I had not heard of her, but I mean, a lot of like social thinking, for instance, is contingent on the idea that what we attend to is sort of the first stage of how we respond. So attention, interpretation, like problem-solving outcome. So that's a concept to some degree I'm familiar with, like or the perception being the root of everything. But I'm so curious to hear more because I'm not familiar with Olga Bogdashina's writing. I had Bruce do some research.
And to follow on that, what I was going to say is what's interesting to me is Olga's work, although it was published 20 years ago, the looking at autism from the internal perspective, it's so interesting that that's now becoming a really important core part of all research, the non-external but more internal. But I think the thing that still amazes me is that she's not autistic. And that is well, certainly the stuff I've read, the critical reviews, is not disclosed, but it's like that is a phenomenal perceptional a pickup to think about the internal response, not the external response.
Yeah, I am again quoting Olga here in one of the podcasts of hers. I learned that she has a son who had autism. And I think he was nonverbal for quite some period of time. And then it suddenly clicked and he started speaking. I don't know to the extent that he speaks, but Aloysia and Alicia, I think that's the name of her children. I don't my pronunciation may not be right. But being a mother of someone who has autism influenced her quite a lot in her understanding of autism. And so coming back to the point that we were discussing, she wrote a lot about, she started from the level of perception and then goes into how do we understand and how do we interpret and then how do we respond. Mm-hmm. And then she talked about the different dimensions of sensation, like seeing, hearing, tasting, touch, proprioception, and so on. And in most of the books that I read, they gave a very peripheral importance to these aspects. Very peripheral. It's like, this would appear as 8th chapter or 9th chapter in the book.
Yeah.
Much after they have explained about the social difficulties and the executive function difficulties and whatnot, it would come as 8th or 9th chapter in the book. And people who do not, who may, if they could not pass these chapters, they may not come to that part.
Yeah.
Okay. But she started with that part.
Yeah.
Okay?
Oh, good.
She starts with that part. But more importantly, how these things combine in the brain to create that experience that we have, and how is that experience very significantly different from others. And if your experience is different to begin with, then everything that comes out of it is obviously going to be different.
Yeah,
is going to be different. So that's a very important idea that I picked up from her book. And she discusses several concepts, like, let me check.
It's interesting, Kara, I know you and I talk about this time, like sensory is the most important thing in my presentation. It's like, that's where you start. And I still think that a lot of our difficulties, almost all of them are sensory.
Yeah, definitely heighten your nervous system,
manifested in social communication, relationships, etc. Yes, sorry.
Exactly. So again, in one of the podcasts that I listened to, I heard this funny yet very captivating quote: "You can't think right if your underwear is too tight." It is true.
A general comment for we all need to know. Yes.
Yeah. So they showed a pyramid, and you have the executive functioning, the social difficulties, and at the base of the pyramid was the sensory perception.
Yeah.
So it is, you cannot talk about autism without mentioning Dr. Temple Grandin. And my introduction to autism was through Dr. Temple Grandin. And in her TED talk, one of the early TED talks that she gave, she said when she grew up, she always thought in pictures. And she also imagined that everybody else thought in pictures.
Yeah, we're all limited by our own experience. We assume that's what other people experience.
So it's basically a projection. Oh, I think different. I think visually.
So do
And
others.
that means all of us must think visually. Now, how do you verify this, whether others think visually or not? Like, you can ask someone, and if they understand this concept, they may say yes or no, but there is no sure way to switch brains and then experience what they are experiencing. That is not possible.
No.
That is not, at least in my understanding, that's not possible. So, so her statement of thinking in pictures connected with me a lot, because that's how I was able to load the whole book in my head, because it was like a picture. It was like a picture in my head. And she also mentioned my thinking is bottom up. And I realized, oh yeah, my thinking is also bottom up. But if you look at the nature very carefully, nature operates in a bottom up way. A seed starts growing, and it's a bottom up process. An embryo starts growing, and it's a bottom up process.
It doesn't worry about where it's going or what's happening or what's going around. It's just growing.
The point is, the top down thinking that we have helps us to formulate plans, but when we execute it, it's all done bottom up. It's done brick by brick, brick by brick. Even if you have assembled things that are made before, they are also done bottom up. So the execution happens in bottom up, but the planning for the execution happens top down.
And now I'm thinking too, because I have always struggled with academic writing that is, because it's top-down structure. You have to follow the structure. I'm much better with the free-flowing, creative, don't know where I'm going, let's see where I end up. And I've been thinking about that a lot lately as I navigate where I want to publish different articles, book chapters, things like that. Like, I want the ones that appreciate my bottom-up processing, and I enjoy it so much more, because the top-down, when I try to impose top-down, it is really because I am trying to communicate in a way that is unnatural for me, that is the structure that other people use.
I'm glad that you've combined them, because we actually ran a conference last year. The Autism Canada's Awesome Conference was about creativity and top down versus bottom up, and not enough people, I think, appreciated that you can't be totally bottom up, and you can't be totally top down, because structure to filling it in. But that balance, we do tend to be so bottom up thinking as autistics in general. I hope so.
To make things run very efficiently, you need a balance of both. And Olga also points to various aspects of our brain that makes top-down thinking difficult. She mentions a phrase called mini columns. It's probably more neuroscience-y. There are some structures called mini columns in the brains of people with autism that enable them to remember the details very well, because the mini columns are good in interacting among themselves, but not so good in interacting something that's far out in the other corner of the brain.
Context switching.
Switching.
Well, it's very specifically context switching, Peter Van Meulen's idea.
Context switching. So there is a constitutional limitation which makes it difficult to do the top-down thinking so easily. That's why it takes probably more time or more research or more enabling factors
Yeah.
to make the top down. Enabling factors, what I mean is, for example, a visually challenged person uses braille to read.
Mhm.
So that's something that enables him, right? So like that, I may need an enabling tool.
Mhm.
Like, to say you have to be more structured is like very top down. But if you
Yes.
give me an example of what it means to be
Yes.
more structured,
What it looks like, what
that
the
is a
structure looks like.
yes, at least one example of what a
Yeah.
structure looks like. Then from there, I can do my own or
Extrapolate
think
and
about my. But
synthesize.
it is that conceptualizing. Okay, you need to take a more structured approach. That's the part that's difficult. Like,
Yeah.
how?
I
Like,
had to
how
get
do I create this?
samples for my PhD, like application to a PhD program. I asked someone who I knew who was in one and said, like, what did you submit? I needed to see what was
Mhm.
expected.
Yeah, yeah. So
It's
now,
stupid in these examples that, in fact, like academia, if you want to do a PhD in your thesis, there are very rigid structures. But up until the 1990s, I don't think anybody wrote them down. And then in the 2000s, you
yes.
suddenly had like learning skills departments working for postgrads to say, oh, you need to do a thesis. Well, here are actually the 5 things you need to do. And
Mhm.
yes.
Go
So
on.
a lot of things were implicit,
Yeah.
and again, I would like to again quote another, not quote, but paraphrase something that I learned about the genius of the beautiful mind. What's his name? Alan Turing.
Oh, yes.
Alan Turing. So he worked at Bletchley Park,
Mm-hmm.
right? And there were people who worked with him, and they talked about him in that documentary. And they said, one of the mathematicians said, there's a difference between an intellectual and a genius.
Mm-hmm.
When you hear an intellectual person talk about his idea, and granted that you're also in the same field as him or her, after talking to him, you realize it's a brilliant idea. And yeah, I see how it works. And maybe I could have also come up with that idea. But you can never do that with a genius.
Yes. That's true.
Meaning constantly
Yeah.
surprising you with jumps that you cannot dream.
Mm-hmm.
Like the process by which he comes up with this idea is far unreachable.
Mm-hmm.
So the point is, all these academic work that has happened up until 1990s or 2000s was mostly individual.
Mm-hmm.
It's like it's his idea and it's his work, and he formulated it this way. And probably, in the later years, as Bruce mentioned, people started to create some principles and guidelines as to how how a thesis or a dissertation should look like,
Mm-hmm.
and then it helped many people. So that's my extended talk on how Olga's book continues to help me.
I love
There
that.
are many more aspects to that book. I do not know many more aspects to her books. I do not know how much. She also talks about fragmented perception, which is again attributed to the neuronal structure. And again, the result of that is the weak central coherence.
Mm-hmm.
It's like you cannot connect one detail with another detail and make a
Yes.
big picture, because you're perceiving fragments. Because,
Yes.
again, remembering a story by plot and remembering a story by details,
Yes.
that's a big difference.
It
Like
really is.
in my case, like let's say, I'm very fond of Interstellar, and if someone asks me to talk about Interstellar, I talk in a very scene by scene fashion,
Yeah. Yeah.
adding
Chronological.
all
Yeah.
the details. And the person who's listening to it for the first time will be lost in the details.
Yes. I have never been able to summarize things easily because, again, all of the details seem important to me.
Yes.
I get
yes.
frustrated. If someone says, "What's your book about?" I should really memorize a line or two just to sell my book, but I can't. And I just go, I don't know. I don't know what to say to that.
Again,
autism, education.
It's overwhelming. It's
everything.
overwhelming to summarize and distill information.
So that's again what you mentioned. Every detail looks equally important.
Yeah.
Right? And this probably is the right time to mention this technical term, Gestalt.
Yes, Gestalt processing. Yeah.
Gestalt perception. I learned the word Gestalt perception from Olga's book.
Yeah.
And when I started reading it and understanding it, okay, it's like things are perceived in infinite detail, which is why it's like overwhelming. And in the modern modern world, we are able to realize this because we have computers that talk about file sizes.
Yes.
Right, like a high definition video, a 4K video, 8K video, and it takes up so much memory.
Yeah.
And that's why you cannot use a USB flash drive for certain kinds of videos because it simply cannot fill it. It's an overloading. I realized, okay, maybe that's what's happening to me.
Yeah.
And I get so overwhelmed by a certain scenery and what's happening. And others are able to block and only see what they want to see.
Yeah.
And again, Olga describes this as sensory gating deficit.
Mm-hmm.
So the tuning in and the tuning out, people are able to do that
very easily. Yeah. So that corresponds a little bit to monotropism.
Yes, monotropic processing. Yeah.
And yeah, it's interesting because it's a difference in attending. It's a difference in, being able to look where you're supposed to look at the right time. And is it a deficit? That would be my question.
Actually, I was just thinking about that. Like,
I know you, Bruce.
Pugal, I made a joke about films. Is that I used to work in the film industry. I'm still actually actively as a film composer. Films to me are not movies like it may be to you or to Kara. They are sort of fuzzy visuals with some interesting sounds. And so when I'm watching a movie, it's why I don't watch films that much. All I'm concentrating on is the film. I can sometimes just take the focus back a little bit and go, did that work for that scene? No, it didn't. And then back to the music again. So I do have the ability to get out, but it's overwhelming. It's just I watching films are, especially in the theater, I'm not watching the pictures.
Mm-hmm.
It's interesting. I can't gate in that sense, very much so.
So in other words, it's like an all-consuming, phenomenon. It could be the music for someone who is musically oriented. It could be the visuals for someone who is visually oriented, or it could be the emotions that are conveyed. It's like one part of that, one dimension of what is presented to you takes all of your energy.
Yes.
And even worse, again, for me, going back on the monotropism, is not only am I just listening to music, but I'm listening and thinking of the technical details. Mm-hmm. How was that produced? What were they doing? How's that mixed? And so it's like, it's not even like, I'm trying to do 3 dimensions. It's like, I'm not here. I'm like here, into the music. Sorry for anybody watching. That's a little creepy.
So the point is, this is almost automatic. Like you can maybe to some degree you can slow yourself down, but it's like you're drawn to it. You're drawn to it. It's like the separation of the different aspects is difficult. It's like they are intertwined so much that that we cannot see it as separate aspects. It's different unless someone presents an analysis where they separate the music from the scene. It's difficult to do it by ourselves.
Yeah, well, there's many studies that track sort of gaze and what autistic adults or children are attending to when they watch things, and tends to be more scattered, noticing more things, less attuned to the eyes.
That is true. That is true. But again, I keep going back to her book. She mentions something called conscious perception
Mm-hmm.
and then unconscious perception. I don't know which book and what chapter.
Yeah.
But she talks about conscious perception and then unconscious perception. Like, there are things that you know because you clearly have read that somewhere. And then there are things that you know, but you do not know that you know. And it somehow comes out of you at some moment and you're surprised yourself. Like, where did that come from?
Yeah.
Right? Like, how did that come out of me? that kind of experience.
I've always loved walking through cities and noticing things that other people don't, but then walking to a lamppost.
Right.
Even in my hometown of Melbourne, there were on one of the alleys downtown, there was a WAPO, WAPOO paint ad, and it was from the 50s or 60s, and it had been there since my dad and mom grew up there. And I used to walk past this with friends and say, "Have you noticed that?" And they went, "No." And I'd walk past it like 150 times. But literally, I'd be going, "Oh, that advertising, it's really great. It looks like 1950s. Yeah. Bang, I'll run into somebody."
Yeah.
And it's like, it's the forest from the trees. It's looking at the trees at such a detail that you're not even recognizing you're in a forest, or if the forest is finished. Or
Okay.
So Bruce, you can't, when I come to visit you in Vancouver at some point, you can't take me to beaches or anywhere where there are rocks, because I find fossils everywhere I go. Like, bang, bang, bang. I just,
that's a challenge.
Visually, I'm good at picking these things out. And, but I, like you, I also, I'll leave cupboards open and not realize I've left them open. Like, my attention is so interesting, the things we pick up on.
To come back to Kara's question, is that kind of sensory processing actually a deficit? Right? You asked this question a few moments ago.
Within the system, it is. If you're expected to behave a different way, it can be a disadvantage. But I don't think in the grand sense it is. What do you think?
Yeah. So again, another podcast, TEDx talk on autism said, you may be challenged by your environment, but you are not challenged yourself in its totality. For example, if you consider a whale, a blue whale, and a human being, the blue whale is challenged living outside the water, and we are challenged living inside the water. But if you have a submarine in which you have created a local environment that can sustain you, then you can, in theory, go with the blue whale.
Yeah.
Right? So if you are in a team where someone else is responsible for the top-down thinking and you are responsible for the bottom-up thinking, and you can combine your skills to achieve something much better that either of you couldn't do it by yourself
individually,
then there it's an advantage. So advantage or disadvantage totally depends on how it's applied, and not by itself. So that would be my answer to your question, or my understanding.
I think I like your answer, and I'll predicate it with, yeah, I can say that. What we're fundamentally questioning is that people think it's a deficit straight away, and we're going, no, it's not. Especially with synergy, which you've just described. We work better. In a lot of ways, we work better in teams where somebody can handle the messy details that we're hopeless at, and let us give us our strength. Let us do with our strengths.
Yeah. So that, again, all these deficit. Again, I would like to give an example of using a black marker to write on a white board. Everybody can see it. If you write it with a yellow marker, some people have difficulty seeing it. If you write it with a white marker, nobody can see it.
Yeah.
So it's a relative difference. Whether it's a deficit or not is a relative difference.
Yeah.
It's like if you are with someone who does a lot of top-down thinking and you're expected to do the top-down thinking with him or her, then with reference to that person, you're disadvantaged.
Yeah. And if we redesigned education and instead it was more privileging the bottom up, there would certainly be learners who would struggle with that, whereas different learners would potentially thrive.
Yeah. So the whole, again, it's a game of numbers. Valerie Gauss, Valerie, Valerie Gauss, Dr. Valerie Gauss, she, in her book, I read a statement, most people with autism suffer a lot because they are living in a world that is not designed for them. It's, it's like you design so that most people can benefit from it, right? Like that is how things work. Certain things are more right-handed.
Yeah.
Right?
As a lefty, this is actually my left hand, even I think it's reversed image, but yeah, I know.
Right, like using the mouse.
Yeah.
Computer mouse, left click and right click. But that's, again, based on the fact that most people are right-handed. Right? So it is designed to work for most people, but there are exceptions to it. And that's where people with autism come in. And
we're not talking about, like, in one respect, it's like left-handed mouses were designed really quickly because this was a perceptual problem in the 80s. We get that. We are still struggling with, there are changes that can be made to society in general that are more inclusive, that are not going to change. And I'll go to simple things. This is part of an example I use in my presentations. It's like, there's no reason to play loud music in supermarkets all the time. There is absolutely no reason. In fact, there are studies saying economically it's a bad idea. It's an extraction of music, 20 years. There's no reason. So please turn the music down for a day and watch how many of us suddenly will go to that supermarket or feel much more relaxed and perhaps buy more food or spend more money. That's the sort of changes we're kind of be looking at. The recognition that the environment, the world is not built for us. And that's fine. But with some small changes, or in education, a fundamental rewriting of the system was going to benefit everybody.
Working on it.
Yes. It'll make it better for everybody. I want to watch the time because we've been going for like an hour and 45 minutes. I would love to hear, and this is something that's fascinating me because I'm slightly multicultural, but how's your native culture? How's your current culture? How's the multicultural world affected you and the way you're looking at autism?
Okay, so Kara, were you about to say something?
No, I was just saying good question to myself about Bruce's comment.
Yes, so I come from a culture that is more Eastern, and Eastern cultures tend to be more community oriented, and Western cultures tend to be more individualistic, right?
Yep.
And growing up, the community had a both positive and a negative effect on me, meaning, when I was able to conform and match the expectations or meet the expectations and even go beyond the expectations, there was a lot of celebration, admiration. But when I couldn't meet the expectations, I felt like, oh my God, I have let down this many people. I have let down this many people. It's like so many people that I have let down. And so that impact was a lot. I felt like, if I had, if I do not have this many people expecting out of me, then the loss wouldn't be felt, or the letdown wouldn't be so severe.
Yeah.
Although no one told me, but I felt it.
That
It's like,
pressure. Yeah.
yeah, I felt that pressure, like, and moving out of India to the Western countries, like in the Netherlands and so on. There is, of course, nobody knows me there, so there is very little expectation of what I'm expected to do. And again, nobody knows me there, so if I need help, it's also hard to get help,
Yeah.
right? Because there are not many people that I can relate to. I did form a good bond with a group of people in the Netherlands to whom I'm still connected to, but it took me more time. It took me more, because back where I grew up, there are certain procedures and events that help you to they are created so that socializing can happen.
Okay.
Like, you go to the temple,
Yeah.
it's not just to pray, but it's also to meet people that you haven't met
Yeah.
in a long period of time, and that can trigger some activity, some future events, and so on. So it's like it builds opportunities to build. But when I moved to the Netherlands, it's like, okay, so are there such preset events here that can help me to do? I had to find out. And again, those events were mostly volitional. Like, you can go if you want to go, but you don't have to if you don't want to.
Yeah.
And that put me like, oh, that's confusing. And I think in one of your podcasts, you had a student who went to China for their education. I don't remember the
I
name
think
of
you
that
might be
person.
thinking about Dr. Alyssa Hillary.
Could be.
Yes.
She was wearing spectacles,
Yes.
and she gave a very good explanation of aphantasia. So she had spent considerable time in China, right? So, so I had to, again, the gestalt had to change from different places to different places. So finally, I realized, okay, you know what? I'm going to be in my own gestalt and just take what is just needed. I don't want to condition myself to one environment, because that takes a lot of effort.
Yeah.
And then when I go to a different environment, I have to do that process all over again, change all the connections in my brain. And that's like more effort. It takes more effort. So I had come to a point where, okay, so this is me, and I'm just absorbing elements from the environment and then interacting with it instead of getting identified with the environment, which again goes a lot into the Buddhism aspect of things, where they talk a lot about the identities, um, and so on. So that is how the multilingual, multicultural. I can speak a lot more, but that's how it influenced me to the person that I am. Like, I was born. My parents and I followed Hinduism, but I was brought up in a Catholic school where a very secular environment was preserved. And then a good number of my relatives are Christians, and then I've also been to Buddhism. So it's a very multicultural, multi-religious exposure that gave me the outlook that I have right now. So it's one of my friends asked me a question. He asked me, like, so which group of people you're very comfortable with? It's like, is it Indians, or is it Chinese, or is it the Dutch people, the Americans? And he was taken aback by my answer. I told him, dude, I focus on the individual
Yeah.
and not on the group. So I relate to the individuals.
Person to person.
Person to person is, to quote Sarah Hendricks,
Mhm.
It's like harpooning,
Yeah. Yeah.
versus how most neurotypicals gather friends, like casting a net.
Yes.
But I cannot cast a net. I can only harpoon. I can only harpoon.
Oh,
That's why it's a lot of effort.
Pugal,
Yeah.
that what you just said again really resonates with me because anytime I've had to be in sort of larger social events, a strategy I came up with in my 20s was look for someone who looks like they feel as awkward as I do or more. And like that's the person I go to. And
Uh-huh.
yeah, I have to carve out the one-on-one. I can't do the whole.
hmm Even if I do a whole, how it's stored in my head is again a one-on-one. It's a
Yeah.
one-on-one.
When it's
It's
a whole, I actually can't retain it very well. My anxiety is so high.
Mhm.
I don't remember people's faces. I don't remember, if they introduce themselves, I will not remember their names. Like the anxiety, the adrenaline, just I can't encode the memory. Whereas if I am one on one, I can do it.
Yeah, because again, it's a monotropic processing.
Mhm,
One person only.
mhm.
So
This is an
that's
interesting response because you're actually cutting through the question in a way I wasn't expecting, and I kind of want to, and good job.
Bruce likes being surprised.
Well, because what you're doing is you're raising an issue in my mind of how we deal with multicultural perspectives,
Mhm.
and how often. So okay, ellipse. In some of my day-to-day work, when I'm doing presenting, one of the things I talk about when we're talking about language use is being culturally aware. And it's because I come so Melbourne is incredibly multicultural. It's like Toronto. And it's probably like a lot of places you've been to. So I'm used to having people from different backgrounds. And I really don't care. I don't care. I actually do. And now I'm thinking about it, treat those people individually. I recognize, though, cultural differences. And I recognize when my Italian friends would expect this when you go over, and the Chinese and Malaysian friends I had, there's a different things there. From a presentational perspective, I'm thinking about people needing to be a bit more aware of the cultural differences. But I'm often actually now wondering whether I should just give that up and just say, forget about the cultural differences, just work one to one. And I think, okay, so that's kind of clever. The second one, though, is you did raise this earlier and please, I'm about to say a very generalist statement, and this is just a generalization. A lot of contemporary Asian cultures, still there is a stigma around autism, very specifically, and a lot of mental health. You've talked about that. So one of the things I'm raising in the presentations is being aware of that stigma and how, if we're interacting with an autistic person, we can honor the cultural difference, but still honor the neurological difference. And I wonder
Yeah.
if we can do that on one-to-one, or do we still need to be aware of the more cultural aspect of people's backgrounds?
Okay. So I can answer it in the way I have experienced it. So as I've written about my spiritual journey, I have met many people on the spiritual path, and I have been influenced by many people on the spiritual path. I talked about Swami Vivekananda, who came to Chicago, and there are many other spiritual leaders. When I listened I listened to quite a lot of their talks, um, and when I listen to them, one thing that strikes me is they always address what is at the core. CORE. What is at the core? What is at the core of human nature? You know, we can have several coatings over our human nature in the form of nation, in the form of gender, in the form of religion, in the form of ethnicity, in the work that we do, and so on. But at the core, there are some values that people have, and I don't know how to say it. Again, I would like to refer to Olga's book. She says that people with autism have an extra sense to read other people in ways that are different from neurotypicals. You know, it's not just about the body language, it's not about the eye movement, but she says that people with autism have this sense where they can recognize whether someone is okay or not okay, whether someone needs something or, because if you look at the external ways of presenting, like body language and ways of talking, some very highly trained people can mask all this. And I'm saying this from my own experience because I did this masking for quite a long period of time. Right? But the core is something that if you touch that, you have actually really reached that person, whatever culture they are from.
Yeah.
Whatever that would be my answer. It's hard to do this to a larger group of people.
Yes.
But with individuals, if you can touch that core, that is enough. That is enough. Like they will understand that you are from a different culture, they are from a different, they will create ways for you. If that core is not touched, you can go in any number of ways. There may be blocks, there may not be blocks. But if you can touch that core, and the person will open up. For example, like I have lived with roommates from Indonesia, Yemen, Eritrea, Colombia, Venezuela, America, and so on. And with all of them, I've had positive experiences because I was always unconsciously trying to connect to the core. Then, you like this, you like to do this, like to do that. That'll help to some degree. And beyond that, it's about the ability to connect with the core. And with that accomplished, then the cultural differences, in my opinion, may disappear as you continue in that journey with that person, or may not become that relevant. It's like if the person realizes you're trying to help him, you're trying to reach him, trying to extend a hand in a very deep sense, then they will make ways for you.
It reminds me, when I was in high school, one of my favorite teachers was my drama teacher, and there was a motto in that classroom: never be less than what you are. And I was always thinking about this motto and like, well, what are we? What is our essence? And I always thought, like, I felt like we all have this core, just like you described. We all have this core. To me, I visualized it as like a ball of light. That is who we are. And then as we go through life, sometimes we put up things that obscure the light or change how the light could be seen. But that is always the root of who we are. And getting to know someone is very much about getting past the things that may be obscure or dim, the essence of us, that goodness, that yeah. So as you were thinking, I went, wow, this reminds me so much of how I was thinking when I was a teenager about core and connection and who we are.
What I want to add to that is our presence conveys much more than the words and the details and the makeup and the body language and whatnot. And to that extent, sorry?
Oh, no, go on, please finish.
To the extent that we can be present and radiate, the influence will be proportional. So that's my understanding.
May I suggest we stop here, because that's like one of the most positive ways of ending a show that I can think of.
Okay.
Like, just, and I don't mean that, not that, like, I think we can continue for another hour, but just, I was thinking this is there's just so much clarity and positivity in how we're ending. And very often we ending with a question or going into something else. This is just like, Kara and I connected immediately through me listening to her on a podcast and then reaching out. And it's just like, it was interesting. You should say it wasn't the external. It was the external, but what she was reflecting was just so much about what I love and admire about her. And it was about education, of course. And it's interesting. It's like you're talking about that. I think I just heard Kara talk for a couple of minutes and I could see the white light. And of course, then when we met in person, it was just like,
we just connected so easily.
Yeah. So I would love to. There's so many other points I would love to talk about, but I really think this is a wonderful way to finish on from autistic perspective and a neurotypical perspective. Is just like get rid of the fluff. Look for the core.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you so much for sharing some of your core with us today too, and it was such a delight.
I'm honored to be given this opportunity, and if the schedule permits, we can also do other meetings. But I know you all have busy schedules. I've only covered one point of the 4 that I wrote. But,
so we've got more topics in mind for future.
Yes, that's what I'm saying. And there is also the other host, Maja Toudal.
Yes.
Well, I leave the planning and organization to you because you run the show. But I would be happy to contribute and share my understanding and perspectives.
We should reach out to Olga. We should reach out to Olga and get like both of you on at the same time.
Yes, that would be incredible.
Yeah, it would be an honor, a great honor to meet and be part of a show with
your face just changed. It's like
yeah.
Wonderful. Well, thank you so much, and thank you for everyone who is listening or watching. Hope you enjoyed it, and I don't know, I'm going to go away thinking about a lot of things, and I really appreciate the reflection that you brought out in me.
Thank you.
Happy. Thank you, everyone.
Bye.
I